Whispers of the Tide. Amelia Price considered herself immune to ghost stories. As a journalist specializing in debunking supernatural myths, she'd earned a reputation for dismantling local legends with cold, hard facts. When her editor assigned her to investigate the whispering statue of Greystone, she rolled her eyes. Another cursed relic, another easy paycheck. Her first impression of the coastal town was uneventful. It was small, quiet, and soaked in mist that seemed to rise straight out of the ocean. The statue was the only remarkable feature, standing alone on the beach, battered by the salty wind. It depicted a woman holding an anchor, her face frozen in a mix of sorrow and defiance. Locals claimed to hear whispers from it during storms, voices said to belong to sailors lost at sea. Amelia wasn't interested in rumors. She set up her camera and began filming. As she narrated her introduction, her microphone picked up faint murmurs. She paused, annoyed, thinking it was interference from the wind. But when she played back the footage later that evening in her hotel room, the murmurs were unmistakable, a low, guttural voice repeating her name. The next day, she interviewed the villagers, but most were tight-lipped. The few who spoke warned her to leave. "The statue doesn't like attention," said Gareth, an elderly fisherman with haunted eyes. "It's a marker, a gate. Those who get too close don't come back the same." Dismissive of Gareth's words, Amelia decided to spend the night near the statue. She set up camp on the beach, determined to record the source of the whispers. As the tide rolled in and the moonlight danced on the waves, the whispers began again. They were clearer this time, like voices carried on the wind. But there was something else, an eerie melody, a song too beautiful and mournful to be natural. As she listened, she felt a chill on her neck. Turning, she saw footprints in the sand, wet, bare footprints that led straight to the statue. The statue, which she could have sworn had been facing the horizon, was now turned slightly toward her. Amelia's heart raced, but she refused to back down. She began taking photographs, but her camera malfunctioned, the screen flickering with static. Frustrated, she decided to touch the statue. The stone was unnaturally cold, and as her fingers brushed its surface, she heard a scream, louder than the whispers, louder than the crashing waves. The ground beneath her feet gave way, and she sank into the sand. It wasn't quicksand, but something alive, pulling her down. She screamed, clawing at the ground, but the sand transformed into dark, brackish water. Hands reached out, pale and skeletal, dragging her toward the ocean. Suddenly, Gareth appeared, dragging her free with surprising strength. He muttered a prayer, throwing salt over his shoulder and into the waves. The whispers subsided, and the hands retreated, but the statue's eyes seemed to follow her as they left the beach. Back in her hotel room, Amelia grilled Gareth for answers. He reluctantly explained that the statue wasn't merely cursed, it was a prison. It marked the spot where an ancient sea spirit, known as the Siren Queen, had been trapped. "The statue doesn't whisper to the living," Gareth said. "It whispers to the dead, calling them to her." Amelia's curiosity turned to terror. She researched the town's history and found a diary from the ship captain who disappeared centuries ago. The captain's final entry described how his crew had been lured by a song and dragged beneath the waves. "She promised us freedom," the entry read, "but her freedom means our doom." Determined to finish her story, Amelia returned to the beach, armed with salt and an iron dagger, items she'd read could protect against spirits. The tide was higher than ever, and the whispers had turned into a cacophony of screams. As she approached the statue, she saw figures in the water, shadowy, humanoid shapes with glowing eyes. The Siren Queen was calling her. Amelia stabbed the dagger into the base of the statue, hoping to sever its connection to the sea. But instead, the ground shook and the statue cracked open. A torrent of seawater and spectral energy burst forth, knocking her to the ground. From the ruins emerged a figure, half human, half aquatic, with glowing eyes and a voice like thunder. "You have freed me," the Siren Queen said, "but freedom comes at a price." Realizing the queen couldn't be defeated, Gareth arrived just in time, holding a talisman. "She can't take both of us," he said. Before Amelia could stop him, he walked into the sea, chanting the spell to reseal the queen. The queen screamed in rage as the waves swallowed Gareth, and the statue began to rebuild itself, trapping her once again. Amelia was saved, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd only delayed the inevitable. The whispers followed her wherever she went, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw Gareth's face beneath the waves, staring at her with sorrowful eyes. The endless corridor. Leo was proud of his work. Every building he had designed stood as a testament to his precision and vision. When the job at Cypress Towers came to him, a pre-demolition inspection, he barely gave it a second thought. The structure had stood abandoned for decades, a decaying monolith shrouded in local folklore. Stories of disappearances, shadowy figures, and corridors that stretched into infinity were nothing more than the superstitions of an isolated town, Leo thought. He had no time for ghost stories. From the outside, the building was ordinary, just another forgotten skyscraper. But the moment he stepped inside, something shifted. The air was thick, charged with an unnatural stillness. The walls seemed to absorb sound, muting his footsteps and the hum of the city outside. Dismissing the unease as nerves, Leo set to work. The building was a maze of identical corridors. To keep track of his path, Leo marked the walls with chalk arrows, double-checking his blueprints to confirm his location. The first few hours were uneventful, though the corridors seemed longer than they should be. Then the anomalies began. One of his chalk arrows appeared on the ceiling of a hallway he hadn't yet entered. His tape measure stretched far beyond the length indicated on the blueprints, the numbers spinning wildly. Light fixtures flickered, and his flashlight dimmed inexplicably, despite fresh batteries. By evening, Leo had covered several floors but still hadn't found the stairwell back to the ground floor. The corridors seemed to shift when he wasn't looking, their angles slightly askew. The whispers began as faint murmurs, so faint he thought he was imagining them. But they grew louder, forming fragmented phrases like, "Not yours," and "Stay with us." Drafts, determined to find answers, Leo pressed on, eventually reaching a spiral staircase that wasn't on the blueprints. A faint red glow emanated from below, drawing him downward. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a cacophony of voices. "Welcome back. You never left. Finish what you started." The staircase ended in a vast, cavernous space filled with incomplete architectural models, twisted, nightmarish versions of buildings he had designed over the years. Each model was damaged, windows shattered, walls crumbling, roofs caving in. At the center of the room stood a full-scale replica of Cypress Towers, pulsating as if alive. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, skeletal man in a tattered suit. His face was obscured by a veil of static, as if he were a glitch in reality. "You gave it form," the figure said, gesturing to the tower. "But you abandoned it. Buildings are not just walls and beams, they are reflections of their creators. And this one," he said, stepping closer, "is hungry." Leo demanded answers, but the figure merely pointed to the pulsating tower. "Enter," it said, "and you'll understand." Against his better judgment, Leo stepped inside the replica. The walls shifted, forming a maze that mirrored the real building. Inside, he saw echoes of himself, memories of his life, his failures, his doubts. The corridors twisted into moments he had long buried. The day he abandoned a project because it was too complex, the relationships he had neglected for his career, the guilt he had carried for years. The building wasn't just a structure, it was a living entity, a manifestation of his own mind. Every flaw, every imperfection he'd ignored in his designs had become part of this labyrinth. It was feeding on him, growing stronger with every step he took. Leo tried to run, but the corridors stretched endlessly, trapping him. The whispers became deafening, echoing his own thoughts. "You failed them. You can't escape. Stay with us." Realizing there was no way out, Leo confronted the skeletal figure. "What do you want from me?" he demanded. The figure's static face flickered, revealing a glimpse of Leo's own reflection. "You created this place," it said. "Only you can destroy it." Understanding the weight of those words, Leo placed his hands on the walls of the pulsating tower and focused all his will on dismantling it. The building groaned, collapsing inward as his memories were consumed. The whispers faded, and the corridors dissolved into light. When the rescue team found him days later, he was lying unconscious outside the ruins of Cypress Towers. The building was gone, as if it had never existed. But Leo was never the same. His memory of the event fragmented, his mind haunted by faint whispers in the quiet moments of his life. Strings of the Damned, Marta had always believed in reason. As a schoolteacher, she dismissed the supernatural tales her students whispered. But when her nephew Thomas disappeared without a trace, leaving behind nothing but a small, lifelike puppet on her doorstep, her convictions began to unravel. The puppet was chilling in its detail. Glass eyes that gleamed unnaturally, joints that creaked as if alive. What unsettled Marta most was its face. It was Thomas, down to the faint scar on his chin. The puppet's tiny mouth seemed to smirk at her when she turned away. Her search for Thomas led her to the ruins of an old workshop deep in the forest. Decades ago, Elda, the village's puppet maker, had lived there. Her creations were once the pride of the town, but after a tragic fire took her husband and son, her work grew macabre. Soon after, children began vanishing, and the villagers accused Elda of witchcraft. They burned her workshop, but her body was never found. Ignoring warnings from the villagers, Marta ventured into the forest. The path to the workshop was overgrown, the trees clawing at her as if trying to turn her back. When she arrived, the ruins seemed alive. The charred remains of the building exuded an unnatural cold, and faint whispers carried on the wind, too quiet to decipher. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burned wood and something sickly sweet. The shelves were lined with puppets, each more grotesque than the last. Their faces were unnervingly lifelike, frozen in expressions of terror. As Marta examined one, its head turned slightly, its glass eyes locking onto hers. She stumbled back, heart racing. In the center of the room, she found a large, unfinished puppet. It bore her own likeness, down to the small mole on her left cheek. Its wooden hands were outstretched, as if waiting to grab her. Next to it lay a journal, its pages filled with rambling notes and sketches. One passage read, "Their souls are mine to shape, their laughter mine to keep, but the ritual must be completed, one soul for another." Determined to break the curse, Marta dug deeper. She learned that Elda's puppets weren't merely cursed. They were vessels for the children's souls. The ritual to free them was written in the journal, but it required a terrible sacrifice. The puppets would return to flesh, but someone had to take their place. The whispers in the room grew louder as Marta prepared for the ritual. The puppets began to move, their tiny wooden limbs creaking as they turned to watch her. They whispered in unison, "She won't let us go." The air grew colder, and the shadows in the room coalesced into a figure, a woman with burned skeletal features and hollow eyes. Elda, her voice was a rasping growl. "You think you can take them from me? They are all I have left." Elda raised a hand, and the unfinished puppet resembling Marta lurched toward her. Its joints snapped and clicked as it moved, its glass eyes glowing with a sinister light. Marta grabbed a nearby iron poker and swung at the puppet, shattering its head. But even as it collapsed, Elda's laughter echoed through the room. With no time to waste, Marta began the ritual. She scattered salt and herbs around the room, chanting the words from the journal. The puppets screamed, their tiny bodies convulsing as cracks spread across their surfaces. Ghostly figures of children began to emerge, their faces filled with hope. But Elda wasn't finished. She lunged at Marta, her burned hands clawing at her face. "You can't take them!" she shrieked. "They're mine!" Marta fought back, holding Elda at bay long enough to complete the final incantation. A blinding light filled the room as the children's souls were freed. Elda screamed, her form dissolving into ash, the puppets crumbled to dust, and the children reappeared outside the workshop, alive and whole. Marta wept with relief, but her joy was short-lived. The journal's final warning echoed in her mind, one soul for another. Marta refused to let the curse take her. Using the last of her strength, she poured salt over the unfinished puppet and set it ablaze. Elda's spirit shrieked as the flames consumed her vessel, and the puppets fell silent. As dawn broke, the workshop collapsed into ashes. Marta staggered out, exhausted but alive. The children were free, and the curse was broken, for now. But as Marta returned to her home, she found a single puppet on her doorstep, a lifelike figure of Elda, its wooden lips curved into a knowing smile.